Time preference and the Bitcoin dilemma. Should we invest in companies or just buy Bitcoin? The cost of capital is Bitcoin, and that is at least 20% per annum. So anything you do with your money other than consume should be at least returning 20% in dollar terms. Otherwise, Bitcoin is a better investment. This is a dilemma that we're facing as investors. I want to talk about this. First, I want to explain why Bitcoin is so strong. It has to do with the political situation in the United States. And then I want to explain how we're positioning ourselves. It is a dilemma. I mean, it's literally a Bitcoin dilemma. We are fully invested as a fund in particularly artificial intelligence companies. And the question is, I mean, does that even make sense right now? This is not even on podcast. It's July 14, 2025. This is Krim Delco. For the year, we are down 15%. The market is up 7%. We're underperforming by 22%. So Bitcoin is the currency of the future. It's the most important technology that has been developed in this century. I would argue it's even more important than AI and the breakthroughs that we had in AI. And the reason it's so strong is because it is offering an alternative to grift, waste, corruption, and theft. Somebody once said that modern liberal democratic governments are just auctions for stolen goods. In other words, if you're part of Congress, you have a license to steal. The way you do that is by printing money and monetizing a gigantic government deficit. Of course, we disguise it all in constitutional confinement. We say, well, Congress has the right to spend money, so it's all legal, and the judges are okay with it, and the people are okay with it, and presidents get elected. Almost every president promises some sort of balanced budget, and every president just increases the deficit. We've seen this recently with Donald Trump. One of the biggest disappointments for us personally, and I'm sure also for a lot of people in the tech sphere, was actually the pivot of Donald Trump away from draining the swamp towards actually flooding the swamp even more. I'm not going to talk about the details. You have a much more in-depth coverage about the fallout between Elon Musk and Donald Trump and the deficit conversation. Ron Paul weighed in also. There's just a few things I want to say, and then I want to talk about the more important topic of this particular episode, which is how we as investors are positioning ourselves, assuming Bitcoin is our cost of capital. So we have we have the exact opposite of a frugal government. We have a wasteful government. We have massive deficit spending in the United States, at this point around the globe actually, in Europe, in Japan, and China. So every government, every large empire, assuming government, is spending way over its means. The reason that is happening is because taxes are not palatable politically, even in China, and definitely not in democratic countries. So it's happening through the back door of government deficits and monetization through central banks. Fiat money, that's what central bank money is literally the ability to buy any good that is produced by people who accept your money. And if you're the government, if you're the European Central Bank and the EU, which is governing over the euro, then you have access to any kind of good produced and service produced in the European Union that accepts euros. In fact, you even have access to people outside of the EU who accept euros. The same applies to the United States. We call this the reserve currency. So we have several reserve currencies. One is the yen, one is the dollar, one is the euro, and increasingly also the renminbi. What that means is that you, as a government that is governing over that reserve currency, have access to any kind of good and service produced by people who accept your currency. And since you're a reserve currency, that means almost globally, with few exceptions. That maybe in the renminbi case, but you can go to Paraguay and buy a house in euros. You can go to Israel and buy a house in yen, and you can go to anywhere in the world and buy something in dollars. So this, having said that, the attempt by when Trump got elected and Elon Musk formed the Doge team, the idea was to rein in on the spending in favor of a balanced budget, not maybe fully immediately. Everybody was conscious of the fact that we don't want hardcore austerity for the sake of economic growth. But what we wanted, we as when I say we, anybody who was in favor of Doge and who voted for Trump with the perspective of cutting the deficits, was that we wanted a gradual change of culture and a gradual change of behavior within the US government towards a strong dollar, a strong economy that is based on productivity and merit, and a reduction of grift, waste, and fraud. That has not happened. In fact, it's increasing now. I just want to put a few examples out there to illustrate my point. For example, we have a canary in the coal mine, actually, which is the situation around NASA. Jared Isaacman was replaced. He was supposed to run NASA with the view of becoming the strongest space agency in the world, building on new AI-driven technology, building on SpaceX technology, and dominate space in the name of the US and the Western world. In fact, what happened is Trump did not appoint him, and the reason he did not appoint him is not clear. Now, we at Orange Capital Partners, we have this saying that is that when things don't make sense, just follow the money. Since this didn't make any sense, we followed the money, and what we came up with, this is an explanation, this is not hard facts, so do your own work, but what we believe happened is that Jared Isaacman was supposed to run NASA in a way that would deteriorate the position of the established defense industry, which has a lot of stakes in space, and deteriorate them in favor of new startups such as SpaceX, Anduril, and others. And that would mean more frugal, more efficiency, more bang for the buck, and less grift and waste and fraud by the established defense company. So he was replaced for that reason. Another case is Medicare, that is the healthcare industrial complex that is hijacking our country, as has been shown in the COVID years. Now there, the problem is that we are spending way over our means. And the reason we're spending way over our means is not because we're providing this amazing service to people, but just because there is a lot of grift, corruption, and waste in the system, and cutting that has not happened. We can see that, for example, by, let's say, the performance of Moderna shares. The stock has been down since the election of Trump, but it's still in the 30s, in my opinion. The stock should be not even existing anymore. Moderna is a fraud company and has no reason to exist. I mean, maybe there are some assets worth some research and IP, but certainly it's not worth tens of billions of dollars, which is the market cap right now. So that shows that we're getting back to business as usual, and the healthcare industrial complex is a very good example of grift, waste, and fraud that is hijacking our country. A third example I want to use just to illustrate how Doge and the draining the swamp argument was almost inversed is the situation around infrastructure, particularly energy infrastructure. This is a very sad story, in my opinion. And the reason this is sad is because if you have an objective that you want to build the best possible future for the next generation, then, and this has been the case 500 years ago, 100 years ago, and it's today, you have to build an effective energy infrastructure. Energy is the base for everything that can happen. Energy is the base case for wealth. Without energy, you cannot build transformations, which is what wealth is, the possible transformation of a society. So our energy policy is based on just plain old partisan politics, fossil fuels, coal, things like that. We're not religious about that. This is not about climate change at all. We're decarbonizers, not climate changers. In other words, we quite frankly don't care about melting glaciers. But what we do care about is having a decarbonized energy infrastructure, not because we hate carbon, but because we want more flexibility, more innovation, and getting away from a 19th century energy technology towards a future of nuclear and renewables and other technologies, maybe even fusion. But certainly what we don't want is subsidies for coal and gas. That is absolutely stupid, and again, just a tell of how Trump is totally reversing. Now, so much for the politics. This is not about politics. This episode is trying to make the point that Bitcoin is the future, the most important technology invented in the 20th century. I even wrote a novel, Chronopunk. It's available on our website, links in the show notes, that illustrates that point in a narrative, in a fictional narrative. The most important thing that you can bring back from the future to the past is the idea of preserving freedom and a technology to do that. And that's what Bitcoin is. So, having said that, now how do we feel about Bitcoin? We think that Bitcoin, the valuation of Bitcoin, of course, is being thrown around by many people. I think there are a few opinion leaders. Safedin Ammous is one of them, as spicy-tongued as he is, and sometimes he goes too far, but I think he's the best economist right now in the business, one of the few actually that even writes about useful things in economics, because the rest of the fiat economic industrial complex, of course, is just actors who have no value added for society. Having said that, there's others, actually, interestingly enough, also Nassim Taleb, two Lebanese people actually who for some reason have inspired me the most. And I'm a Chicago trained economist, so I really kind of have to question my own educational path, but that's a different story. My wife is Lebanese, so maybe I just have a predisposition towards that country. Now, what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is the ability to actually prevent grift, waste, and fraud by controlling the money supply and therefore making it impossible for fiat economists and fiat bureaucrats to alter the software of the economy, to alter the software of money, and to alter the software of money allocation through money printing and all the other shenanigans that are happening on Wall Street in favor of them and their cronies. With Bitcoin, you can't do that. Now, Bitcoin is not the ultimate solution. I think it was Michael Saylor who said that in an interview with Safedin Ammous, and I think I agree with Michael Saylor. Don't go too far. Don't think that Bitcoin is a solution to everything. It's a very good solution for certain things, in particular, the anti-inflation. But of course, government, grift, bureaucrats, the iron triangle of bureaucrats, lobbyists, and representatives will not just go away. They will find ways to tax people. They will find ways to harass people and take their money away, whether it's on the left or on the right. So we shouldn't just declare victory, but for the time being, what we expect is at least a 20% appreciation of Bitcoin in terms of dollars, which is sort of a, let's say, 7-8% natural inflation plus another double-digit percentage of adaptation inflation. So in other words, more demand, not just because of inflation, but just more people want to own Bitcoin. So at least 20%. And having said that now, that means that our cost of capital in dollars is measured by the Bitcoin appreciation, which is, again, at least 20%, probably more, but let's say it's 20%. Now, we at Orange Capital Partners, on our website, actually, have a stated goal of an unlevered return of 15%. So we're already underwater here. And that's a big problem, and that's why we named this episode the Bitcoin Dilemma. So the one thing we need to do now is increase our goal to at least 20% unlevered return, because we don't want to pursue a return that is lower than what we could gain by just owning Bitcoin. So that's number one that we need to do immediately. Otherwise, it just makes no sense to even own anything other than Bitcoin. Now, we have a mission statement at Orange Capital Partners, which is to invest in fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices with large impact. This does not exclude Bitcoin, so Bitcoin can be part of that. We have a small position in Bitcoin, just to be clear, but our largest positions are in Tesla and Nvidia, and that's because of robotics. So here's our thinking. First, we do believe that our returns will be much, much higher than 20%, because if we're right on the AI train that is now coming, then there will be an enormous amount of wealth creation coming from not just those two companies, but those two companies will be the leaders. I've had an episode about a year ago, links in the show notes, where I talk about the risk of Nvidia, and I make it very clear that the risk to Nvidia is to the upside. In other words, the underappreciation or the mismanagement of the fund management industry when it comes to, or the misunderstanding, maybe that's the right word, towards Nvidia is not coming from overvaluing or anything like that. It's the exact opposite. And that's because of the tyranny of large numbers, or maybe somebody has a better word. What I mean by that is that in the investment world, people always get stuck with things like, for example, they're stupid things. Like, for example, a stock, when it gets over 1,000, people get nervous. Well, it's 1,000, it was 100, now it's 1,000. Well, who cares what the actual number is? It can be 10,000, it can be 100,000. The actual value of the stock doesn't matter. Same with the market cap. Oh, Nvidia is 4 trillion. Oh my gosh, how can it be 4 trillion? Now, you can make some arguments. You can say, for example, that there's a certain percentage that the company can or should be as percent of GDP. But even that, what does that mean if GDP itself can be altered by that same company, which is exactly what Nvidia is doing and will be doing in the future. So if you have a GDP of 30 trillion now, and the GDP can grow by 5, 6, 7%, or in other words, grow much, much faster, driven by Nvidia itself, then maybe Nvidia also deserves to be a much larger chunk of the GDP, and therefore the 4 trillion market cap there's no reason not to buy Nvidia just because it's 4 trillion. That's my point. Can it get 40 trillion? There's no law of physics that prevents that. Maybe a law of politics, a law of social justice and things like that. You can have backlash, you can have pitchforks, you can have all kinds of crazy things happening when there is enormous amounts of wealth creation. But we are not assuming that here at Orange Capital Partners. So we're not investing with the premise of having World War III or the pitchforks. We've said that many times before. We don't. We invest under the assumption that there will be peace and that there will be the rule of law as we know it now. So having said that now, we believe that because of Bitcoin, and this is the conclusion of this episode, because we are actually measuring ourselves against Bitcoin, that's because that gives us or forces us to actually think very deeply about the potential of our investments. And we've come to the conclusion that that potential is enormous. And again, we have an alternative. So this is not just wishful thinking or some snake oil or whatever you want to call it. We have, through the cost of capital, through the analysis that we have with Bitcoin, we have actually forced ourselves to rethink our investments and to think about the actual upside that there is, or the risk, the upside risk. And we've come to the conclusion that that risk, or the upside, or the potential, is much, much higher than Bitcoin. And that's why we are staying investment. And the reason it's higher is because, as valuable as Bitcoin is, Bitcoin has a lot of social value. But the value that Tesla and Nvidia are creating is much more narrow. It's creating value for certain spaces in the economy, for certain sectors in the economy, for certain problems that can be solved, very specific problems, very narrow problems. So in that sense, it's very focused. These problems are big: transportation, energy, science, physics. For people who aren't familiar with the exact thesis that we have for these two companies, I refer to other podcasts, but just in general, what we're investing in here is the replacement of physical reality into the virtual world, and then the development of artificial intelligence with the real world as a reward function that is calibrating that AI. So we're basically accelerating evolution or the development of intelligence by allowing much faster and much lower cost iteration as calibrated by the real world, because we're able to simulate the real world in virtue and then build AI around that. So that is the case. We believe that the upside there is much higher. So that means that you will have
market caps in the tens of trillions fairly soon, if you believe that Bitcoin as a cost of capital is going to underperform these companies in dollars, or in other words, these companies will be worth more in Bitcoin. So right now, one Tesla share is, let's say, $315. One Bitcoin is $115,000. So you can buy a fraction of a Bitcoin with one Tesla share, and that fraction will increase, of course. That fraction will increase in, let's say, 5 years. So we'll be able, by selling one share of Tesla, you will be able to buy more Bitcoin. This is the fundamental thesis. So we turned the Bitcoin dilemma into an opportunity by using Bitcoin as a calibration metric to force ourselves, or as a forcing function, if you will, to deeply think about the opportunity. And the conclusion is that the opportunity is as high, if not higher, than we even thought before. Thank you.